Are you a good communicator, or is this just something that you completely suck at? Stay tuned because here I'm going to share how to improve your communication skills. Hi everyone, my name is Evette Rose, founder of Metaphysical Anatomy Technique, and also find out more from me at evetterose.com with all my healing events and also free healing meditation webinars. And guys, also subscribe here to my channel to stay up to date with the latest, greatest research that I am always up to something. So today, welcome here to how to be great at communication. And this is an absolute topic that most of us can relate to, because let's be honest, communication is what makes the world go round. And one of the major issues of bad or just challenging communication is that there's always a communication gap. And this gap can often maybe be like something where we fail to express a certain statement, where we fail to express what we think or feel, or how to convey certain types of information or convey our intention of something. And also the values and the meaning that we bring behind these concepts are normally often different for others as well. And so, of course, the way that we express it, the way that we explain it, just that in itself can cause a miscommunication, even though in your mind, your intention was perfectly positive and clear, and you meant really well. But it can also be miscommunicated. And communication is also not a one-way street, right? It's not just about delivering information. It's a two-way street. Communication is about talking, right? But it's not just about talking at someone. It's having a conversation. And in that conversation, that's where you establish like what I would call a platform. You establish a bond. It doesn't matter whether you know the person or not, but there's almost like a connection where there's an understanding, right? There's an understanding where you connect with emotions, feelings, intellect, concept, and ideas. And communication, as you know, can make or break a relationship, because the lack of communication, of course, can break it. And of course, too much communication can also break it, really depending on what type of communication it is that you are having. So when we don't feel the gap that is now, for example, there, that maybe, be running from a time span that needs to be filled, and needing to be filled with some types of information. And sometimes we just like to talk for the sake of talking. We talk because we want to hear it. We talk because we want to feel also heard. So now let's also look at, why do we have communication issues? So first, some of the many causes is just avoiding difficult conversations. And this is something that I can absolutely also relate to, because when we are faced with the possibility of maybe having to deal with a challenging conversation with someone, then we might, choose to avoid it. We might choose to procrastinate it, because when we start to perceive that like a conversation is going to be difficult, and when we start thinking, I just don't want to deal with it. And we sometimes sacrifice our truth as a result of that, because we think that sometimes that the conflict is being more feared than the actual outcome it is that we want. Because of course, we are all confrontational avoidant. Being in a place of confrontation is not a fun place to be in, because it means that there is rejection, there is disconnection. And we are biologically designed to be connected. So there's also almost like a biological repellent that we have, like a rejection, like towards avoiding confrontation. And another aspect that we can also have is emotional barriers, but emotional barriers. And the reason that comes with that is that it's very hard for people to open up about their emotions and to really truly just say how they feel. A few topics can just be completely off limits and just not be wanting to receive by people. Sometimes it's not even about what it is that the person doesn't want to say. Sometimes it's also about what people don't want to hear, right? So sometimes you might be doing everything right with your communication, but it's the other person that is maybe now rejecting hearing what you have to say. And as a result of that, they can actually start a confrontation, because what you might be saying is making them feel uncomfortable. It's not per se that you are the person that they want to attack. It's more so your values or opinion in terms of how you interpret something that might have made them feel really vulnerable. It could have something to do with maybe sexuality. It can have something to do with racism. It can have something to do with something that, just really deeply challenged a value that is very important to them. Now, another aspect that we also have is physical barriers, and that can be in the sense of like nonverbal communication. And that means sometimes we don't always have the ability to understand, right? Nonverbal gestures and postures, or maybe visual communication, like through eye contact, which can actually make communication a little bit harder to understand. Sometimes someone says something and they're being serious, but they're smiling. Of course, that creates a massive miscommunication because it sends two different types of signals. Now, another challenge that we can be looking at here is, let's say, not showing, for example, the benefit to the person who's listening, right? So in most cases, effective communication has tremendous power, has tremendous impact on relationships, whether it's professional, whether it's friendships, whether it's intimate, and it can really, truly, deeply transform these dynamics. And by transforming these dynamics, we have to be effective with communication. So ineffective communication can actually be a very negative impact on that. And when we also now have, for example, statements where we use you instead of I, and this is when we say now we're discussing our feelings with another person, and we need to maybe sometimes own those feelings rather than place the responsibility onto someone else. We sometimes do that, right? Because we feel maybe victimized in something and our emotions are so strong, it's so great that we can't really clearly see the situation. And then often and this is not necessarily intentional, we sometimes accidentally blame others because we don't know how to digest our own emotional state. We don't even sometimes know how to understand why and how we acted and reacted the way that we did. And another aspect here is that when we have a pattern where we interrupt the other person who's talking, right? So now, regardless of the intention, right, of the interruption, it can make a person actually really feel invalidated. It really makes someone feel invalidated. And it's almost like what they have to say is just not important. They feel disrespected. They feel almost even sometimes demeaned. And of course, this will have a direct trigger on your self-esteem, which will make you feel unworthy of saying what it is that you need to say. Another aspect also of challenges that we can have here is when we exchange information, instead of actually conveying it clearly with the intention to formulate it in the way for the other person to understand what it is that you're trying to say. It's almost like it's like an information dump instead of actually just having a two-way conversation. Because communication is really sometimes often misunderstood because the exchange of the information is not done clearly. And the secret also that many miss is that certain feelings that are also being exchanged can often be the greatest cause as to why we can't really hear what the other person is trying to say. Tone of voice can also be a tremendously big impact, because your tone of voice can sound very happy, but your message can sound as actually quite expressing a boundary. So this can cause a person to not necessarily take a boundary that you're trying to establish seriously. And therefore you feel not just disrespected, but you might feel that your boundaries are also being disrespected. Another challenge that we sometimes also have is automatically believing everyone that just understands you. This is a tough one. And I had to overcome this challenge myself, because we sometimes think and feel that people see the world the way that we do, because we don't have a higher or different reference point other than the way that we communicate already, right? So other people have their own perspectives, but we don't necessarily see the world from their perspective and the way that they might try to communicate that. Another point that we can have also is, say, failing to take different cultural communication sensitivities into consideration. For example, I'm from South Africa, and I've noticed that, for example, when you walk into a room, and if you have a native African person in the room and they're sitting down and you walk in, it's actually out of respect that they don't stand up. They have to stay sitting down, because if they try to match your eye level or try to exceed that, it means that in their culture, it actually means that they are disrespecting you. But now in a Western society, we would see that, for example, as being disrespected. And so this is an excellent way of eye communication and just communicating by saying hi, how that can be a tremendously big miscommunication, which doesn't actually promote bonding, it promotes distrust. But as you now can see, that the intentions were truly out of respect, and it was from a place of innocence. Now, when we look at almost like psychological blocks behind communication as well, we have many different opinions, we have different attitudes, we have different emotions, we have different ways that we digest intellectual information, we have different ways that we digest emotional information as well. And sometimes when we try to connect with someone and we try to convey something, our lack of attention can actually also offend someone. That can create a tremendous amount of distrust because the other person doesn't feel valued. Another aspect that we have also is just poor concentration span. We don't have sometimes the capacity to hold a lot of memory. You know, sometimes the person shares a lot of information and it's almost like we just completely disassociate. And it's not that we don't value what the other person might be saying. It's just that sometimes it's information overload and we don't know how to politely express that. And the other person is really just truly trying to use communication as a form to connect. It's not that they're actually even trying to say anything of value. Communication is just their way of connecting. So now you can see this as a great example of where two people are, the person's trying to connect by listening, but it's too much. So they disconnect. And the other person's trying to connect by talking too much. And then they feel invalidated because the other person cannot receive what it is that they're trying to say and ultimately receive their need for connection. Now, another aspect here, of course, is also distrust and defensiveness. And this type of communication or miscommunication, at least, is when we start to have a mistrust between people who are trying to communicate with each other. And that's because maybe they're coming from different angles. And in most cases, it's because the intention for the communication is not clear. Another attitude also here towards communication is attitude. So it's also about how you show up in the conversation. How is your body language showing up? How is your way that you are perhaps listening to the other person? Are you listening to respond? Or are you actually really truly listening to understand? Just that concept alone can make or break a successful conversation. And also sometimes what we have is when you have someone that's very close-minded, and that means that they might be very selfish with their energy, they might be very selfish with their intellectual capacity, and so they might just completely condemn or just eradicate what it is that you're trying to say by just immediately invalidating you, instead of actually just expressing a boundary and saying, I don't really understand what you're saying, and maybe can we just change the topic? Right? So there's healthier ways of actually communicating yourself, and emotional maturity can go a long way. Another point that I want to make here also is, and something that I'm sure we're all really guilty of, and I'm sure that you might also relate to this, and that is premature evaluation. And that is when we just make a conclusion of what we think the person's going to say. We already respond based on what we think that they're going to say. And then we can completely disregard and even invalidate the other person's real true intention for trying to talk to you. And I've done this sometimes. And I've actually noticed that by the time when the person actually talks to me and they finally explain what it is that they wanted to say, that I completely misjudged what their intention was in the first place. And so patience is often also very important. And when you don't feel that sense of patience when you listen to someone, explore why. Because there's maybe self-sabotage, maybe there's something that you don't want to hear, maybe there's something that you can deeply learn from this person. Maybe you have a fear of being made wrong. There can be many different subconscious associations that can be triggered here. And many of the reasons are because of our association with communication. Maybe we have trauma associated with it. So when we listen to people from that place of woundedness, We filter and look, is this person going to say something that my wounded self is going to recognize and then feel vulnerable and triggered by? This is a one important aspect that I really truly have found within me as well. And there's another point here also that very closely correlates to the last point that I was just making, and that is talking before actually listening. Sometimes when there's a situation and you sometimes just look at someone and something happened and you lock eyes with someone and you think that you both think the same thing, but when you actually open up your mouths and you start talking to each other, you realize that there's something, you were completely interpreting the situation differently. But it's in that moment where you think, that person is thinking what I'm thinking, and then you sometimes gear up to have a conversation with them based on that assumption, and then realizing that there's just one massive miscommunication. Another point here as well is showing the other person that you're listening to just not the benefit of a doubt, right? And this is to give them a chance to perhaps state their point, state their opinion, and let go of feeling that someone's trying to convince you, even though they might be. So what? You don't have to be convinced. However, to be the compassionate for witness for someone, to just listen to them and allowing them to be heard, guys, it can go miles. It can really carry the distance of a relationship. Another aspect also here, and something that I also had for myself, was telling instead of sharing. We don't want to be dictators. We're not dictators. We're meant to just have the information that we want to share, express it. But it's not necessarily with the intention to direct or to dictate or to control. And sometimes just your tone of voice can make or break that type of approach as well. So that's also another one to be really, truly, deeply sensitive to. So guys, that is what I have here for you for today. So please also remember to subscribe to my channel. Join me. Also go to evetterose.com. I'm always busy with some kind of healing event or free webinar or healing meditation. We'll be doing live online as well. So come and join me. I would love to hear from you. I would love to see you and to connect with you as well. And subscribe also to the channel because you do want to stay up to date with my latest, best and greatest research as well. So guys, I really look forward to reconnecting with you very, very soon. And until next time, be the light that you are. Thank you for watching this video, and I'm sure that you learned a lot. So guys, subscribe to my channel here and also hit the notifications bar, and so that you can get notified every time when I upload a new video. So guys, also remember to share the video and also look out for courses that I have below in the description bar. And until next time, be the light that you are.